On the FBI's investigation into the shooting and how suspects like Robert Bowers can be detected and possibly prevented, let's go to Jack Jupin, former FBI supervising special agent and a member and who ran the SWAT team, so you know a lot about this. Jack, right now at this hour, what is the FBI, do you think, focusing specifically on?
Well, thank you for having me, Eric. And my thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the victims. Eric, right now the FBI is pulling apart his entire life. Social media, search warrants are being conducted, obviously, of his house. Interviews are being conducted. They're being conducted of his family, his friends. A lot of that's already been done. They're looking into his entire past, and if there were any triggers that might have been picked up along the way that maybe somebody could have noticed. And we're always looking for that at the FBI. We're always looking for tips before these incidents happen. We're constantly looking and asking people to be vigilant of if you see something, say something. So right now, with a lot of help from law enforcement, the FBI is meticulously going through his life and literally looking at everything in his house, his past, his friends, his neighbors, the relatives, everybody's being talked to.
When you say, as we know, when you see something, say something, look at the social media. Look what he wrote on the social media. Constantly pejorative terms and slurs about Jewish people. Basically that philosophy. He was not a supporter of President Trump, attacking him. To what level can the FBI do something about social media? And at what point does free speech cross the line into potential criminality to try and prevent this from happening? Because all the signs apparently are there.
Absolutely. A lot of the times, you're absolutely right. We have to balance your freedom to speak and say what you want with violation of federal or criminal or federal state law. In this case, it doesn't hurt to say something, though. If you see something like that, you can say something. A lot of times, the FBI, especially in terrorism cases, have been alerted to individuals where we have an opportunity to at least go out and talk to the person.
And what do you knock on the door and meet them and say hello?
Sometimes it's exactly that simple. It's a knock on the door. Two agents, maybe an agent and a detective, will go to the door and have a conversation with somebody. A lot of times that was done post 9/11. We did that a lot with people. Did that prevent acts of terror? Maybe it did. Maybe we'll never know. When people think that we're about to knock on their door, or we do knock on their door, and they sense the presence of law enforcement looking at them, sometimes it'll change their mind.
So you're saying if people saw this on social media or maybe talked to them, they should have said something at some point, potentially?
Preferably. Yeah. Again, you bring up a very good point. It's a fine balance of your right to speech and are you violating criminal law?
Meanwhile, today the FBI announced that this is being treated as a hate crime, understandably so, but it's not being treated as an act of terrorism. Here's what officials said about that at the news conference this morning.
Hate crime is where an individual is animated by a hatred or certain animus toward a person of certain ethnicity or religious faith, and it becomes domestic terrorism where there is an ideology that person is then also trying to propagate through violence. And so we continue to see where that line is.
Well, isn't that exactly what he's accused of? Propagating an ideology through violence, anti-Semitism, praising neo-Nazis, this sort of thing. Why isn't this an act of terrorism when other cases are?
Correct. It's considered a hate crime because the statutes are very, very specific here in the federal government and the federal system of what he's violating and what he's doing. Going after somebody specifically because of their religion is considered a hate crime by the FBI standards and by the federal statute.
But wouldn't that be terrorism also? If you want to go out and kill people following an ideology of this white supremacy that he allegedly did?
I mean, it could be considered both. I mean, there's also the crime of making terroristic threats, same type of thing. They're very similar, the statutes, but they do differ a little bit. But yeah, they are similar. But this statute is very specific that if you were going after an individual or a group of individuals based on their race, religion, or their ethnicity, the group they are a part of, it can be considered a hate crime.
Now, you ran the SWAT team for the FBI here in New York, and you were on the SWAT team yourself. Bring us into that 20-minute period when the Pittsburgh SWAT team is in the synagogue and they're talking with him. He's making these threats, they said. He's making derogatory comments about Jewish people, they say. What's that interaction? How do you get him to give up?
Well, what you're doing at that point, I ran the SWAT team in Newark, New Jersey, actually. During that period of time, there have hostage negotiators. At that point, one of your other guests I heard mention yesterday, you want to stop the bleeding. You want to stop the the intruder, you want to talk to the shooter, then you want to, once he's stopped, you want to help the victims. In that 20 minutes while they're talking to him, that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're asking him to peacefully put down his weapons and come out, and that's done through hostage negotiators. Obviously, the SWAT team is there to prepare to do what we got to do if it turns violent, and unfortunately, that's the way it turned yesterday.
Do we know if at all if in that 20-minute period of time that any of the victims were potentially saved or evacuated?
It's probably too early to tell that right now. That's some information, obviously, that will come out in the coming days. But yeah, potentially. But unfortunately, the first thing that has to happen is the shooter needs to be stopped before you can start saving lives. That shooter has to stop before he takes anybody else's life or hurts anyone else.
All right, Jack Jupin, we thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric,
for your insight, and we'll have some new information from the police scanners about this a little later on in the newscast. Jack, thank you.
Thank you for having me.